Bob felt that there needed to be an ecology movement on the same scale as the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the peace movement.
Hunter said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to save the whales.
Whales? Whales?
I thought he was just nuts.
Expecting any violence on the part of the whalers?
Bob coined the term mind bomb for what today we would call going viral, where an idea gets into the electronic media and just spreads like ripples on a water instantly.
Patrick Moore is a radical environmental leader from Winter Harbor, Vancouver Island in Canada. He has been in the environmental movement for over 30 years. Moore served as president of Greenpeace Canada and as director of Greenpeace International. Patrick Moore was co-founder of Greenpeace, but left when his ideas began to differ greatly from theirs. Greenpeace does not currently consider Moore a founder. Dr. Moore was a driving force shaping policy and direction while Greenpeace became the world's largest environmental activist organization. Moore founded the BC Carbon Project, which works to develop a common knowledge on climate change. He served as vice president of environment for Water Furnace International, which is the largest manufacturer of geothermal heat pumps. He is chair of the Sustainable Forest Committee, in which he leads the development of the principles of sustainable forestry. His ideas and many of his beliefs are extremely different from most scientists and other environmental leaders. Patrick Moore has a PhD in ecology from the University of British Columbia, and at the founding time of Greenpeace, he was the only person in the entire organization with a background in science. While at Greenpeace, he was known for his radical ways to get his points across.
I was soon transformed while doing my PhD in ecology into a radical environmental activist. Can't seem to get it to go that way anymore. I found myself in a church basement with a like-minded group planning a protest voyage against U.S. hydrogen bomb testing in Alaska. That's me under the P in '71. We helped change things. Just a few people stopped the hydrogen bomb testing in Alaska along with all the other people, but we were the spearhead for it. I ended up in front of harpoons out on the Pacific Ocean against the Soviet factory whaling fleets, saving the whales from slaughter. They're recovering all over the world now, and sitting on baby seals and getting arrested off the east coast of Newfoundland.
Dr. Moore believes that Greenpeace does not actually care for the environment and that they are only in it for the money that they receive from outside sources. He also criticizes Greenpeace India for their recent allegations of sexual harassment and rape. He believes that India has completely discredited their name.
Vitamin A deficiency kills more children than either malaria, HIV/AIDS, or tuberculosis. It is the biggest killer of children in the world.
Patrick Moore believes that GMOs are the way of the future and that they are the only way that we can feed the number of people that are on the earth.
Golden rice is identical to other rice varieties except for the addition of beta-carotene, which is an essential nutrient and can only cause benefits to health.
He believes that GMOs use less pesticides than any other way of planting crops. He is an advocate of golden rice, which is believed to have enough vitamin A to re-nourish some of the poorest countries in the world.
Golden rice is a genetically modified variety of rice in which 2 genes have been inserted into the rice plant in order to put beta-carotene in the grain of rice.
It has not yet been put on the market, but Moore believes within the next few years it will be. The Helen Keller Foundation, the Bill Gates Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation all support golden rice. The Pope has even blessed golden rice. The Helen Keller Foundation is doing large-scale feeding trials on golden rice to help show the FDA that golden rice is a good investment for the world's poorest countries. One of Dr. Moore's biggest and most disagreed with ideas is that global warming is a myth. He believes that it is all a part of the political agenda and that a computer cannot predict weather change in the future. Dr. Moore believes that there is no such thing as global warming. In fact, he says that the Antarctic has more ice now than it ever has. He is known to say that we are closer to an ice age than we are to global warming. Moore also argues that 450 years ago, the CO2 levels were higher and we had a major ice age. Moore argues that there has been no change in sea ice, which many scientists believe is not true. In fact, Moore believes that sea ice has recovered since 2012. Moore believes that climate change is a natural phenomena and that it has happened for thousands and thousands of years.
Patrick Moore does not believe that carbon dioxide has anything to do with what other scientists call global warming. Moore argues that CO2 is the most important food to anything on Earth, and without CO2, there would be nothing on the Earth. Moore argues that there is no proof that humans are causing greater CO2 emission. He does argue that an increase in CO2 emission leads to an increase in the tree population. Furthermore, Moore believes that there is sufficient evidence that there has been a 40% increase in tree population since the CO2 levels have begun to rise.
This is the curve of carbon dioxide increasing in the global atmosphere since 1959, when we first started measuring it accurately. But we have proxies that go back millions of years, so we know a lot about what CO2 levels have been in the past. This goes back to the beginning of the Earth, but the first part there is the first 4 billion years here, so let's forget about that for a minute. Here's where modern life emerged, the Cambrian explosion, when multicellular life forms came into being. Before that, all life was unicellular, invisible, like microscopic, and lived in the sea. Here, life came on the land, and plants and insects evolved. At that time, CO2 was about 17 times higher than it is today.
As a radical environmentalist, Patrick Moore stood up for animals, people, and the environment. He confronted whalers in many different bodies of water, and, working with Paul Watson, started the Save the Whales movement. Patrick and Paul worked together, and factory whaling was banned soon after their stand. Moore, along with some of his men, would go into the open waters in very small boats, and would ride with the whales until the whalers would leave, or take the risk of hitting one of the protesters while shooting at the whales. Like Paul Watson, it wasn't just the whales. He also was an advocate for seals. He once sat on a seal to save its life. However, he was arrested, and the baby seal was killed immediately after he was arrested. Another idea, out of many, that modern scientists and environmentalists disagree with Patrick on is cutting down trees. Unlike typical modern environmentalists, Moore believes that we can cut down as many trees as we want, as long as we plant as many as we cut down. In other words, Moore says that we can cut down trees just as fast as they are growing, just not faster.
I found myself the only one of 6 international directors with a formal science background. We were now tackling subjects that involved complex issues of toxicology, chemistry, and human health. You don't need a PhD in marine biology to know it's a good thing to save whales from extinction. But when you're analyzing which chemicals to ban, you need to know some science.
The final straw for Moore to leave Greenpeace was chlorine. A few years ago, there was a big debate on whether or not chlorine should be banned. Some scientists, who convinced Patrick's co-founders at Greenpeace, believed that it was dangerous to have chlorine in drinking water. Moore, however, believes that putting chlorine in drinking water is one of the greatest scientific advances of all time. He also believes that there are no alternatives that would be able to replace chlorine in our drinking water and pharmaceuticals.
Science and logic no longer held sway. Sensationalism, misinformation, and fear were what we used to promote our campaigns. The final straw came when my fellow directors decided that we had to work to ban the element chlorine worldwide. They named chlorine the devil's element, as if it were evil. But this was absurd. Adding chlorine to drinking water was one of the biggest advances in the history of public health. And anyone with a basic knowledge of chemistry knew that many of our most effective pharmaceuticals had a chlorine component.
The chlorine is stored in massive amounts and shipped in large containers. There was a large public fear that if gas was handled poorly and too much of the gas got out, or if there was a terrorist attack, it would be fatal to thousands of lives in a single incident.
This kind of rigid, backward thinking is usually attributed to the unenlightened and the anti-scientific. But I've discovered from the inside out that it can infect any organization, even those with names as noble-sounding as Greenpeace. Sometimes I think he goes a little overboard on the militia sort of warlike thing. I remember when I dubbed him the self-styled Rambo of the environmental movement, I think that's the mold that he likes to fit into.
I can't abide doing nothing. So yes, indeed, I'm an activist, and if Pat doesn't like that, well, that's the reason Pat's a corporate whore and I'm not.
So why would Paul Watson describe Moore in such a way? In Watson's defense, Moore has actually made it pretty easy for people to attack him on his record. Over his post-Greenpeace career, he has worked with and been paid by numerous industrial groups to share his opinions with their companies. For example, in 1991, Moore was appointed director of the British Columbia Forest Alliance, a project backed by timber companies that waged a public relations campaign against environmentalist efforts to reduce logging in the region. Later on, in October of 2002, Moore was paid to be a keynote speaker at a conference held by the Wood Promotion Network. The Wood Promotion Network is an industry public relations group that represents over 325 logging and wood companies. At this event, Moore gave a speech entitled, "A Declaration in Support of Protecting the Environment by Growing More Trees and Using More Wood." In this speech, Moore defended his controversial stances on logging, positions that would directly benefit the bottom line of the same companies sponsoring this event. One of the most damaging events in his public career came in an interview he gave in regards to accusations that chemicals in the weed-killing product Roundup were in fact leading to an increase in cancer rates.
I do not believe that glyphosate in Argentina is causing increases in cancer. You can drink a whole quart of it and it won't hurt you.
You want to drink some? We have some here.
I'd be happy to, actually, but not really, but
not really?
I know it wouldn't hurt me.
If you say so, I have some glyphosate.
No, I'm not stupid.
Okay, so you.
No, but I know
so it's dangerous,
I know, right? No, people try to commit suicide with it and fail fairly regularly.
Tell the truth.
It's not dangerous to humans. No, it's not.
So you're ready to drink one glass of glyphosate?
No, I'm not an idiot. Interview me about golden rice. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, then it's finished. Then the interview is finished.
That's a good way to solve things.
Yeah. You're a complete jerk.
Moore was hired in 2010 to work as a public relations manager for the logging conglomerate Asia Pulp and Paper, or APP. APP has been accused of mass deforestation and attempts to cover up its illegal logging practices. The company has also been known to hire armed groups to force native populations out of their homes so they can be cleared for further logging projects. Since the 1980s, APP has cleared over 1 million hectares of forest in Indonesia. To put this in perspective, 1 hectare is the equivalent of nearly 2.5 acres. Moore and his public relations firm, Green Spirit Strategies, were hired to help produce a report on APP activity in the region and its connection to deforestation. Not surprisingly, the report cleared APP of any wrongdoing and instead placed blame on peasants who he accuses of encroaching on the forest. Upon further inspection, the report actually paraphrases parts of an official APP public relations document. Actions such as these have left Moore open to increased scrutiny and criticism from his opponents within the environmental movement.
We believe that Patrick Moore is a radical environmental leader. He proposes radical ideas that are outside the consensus. He does not self-sacrifice and is never in harm's way anymore, but he did at one time put his life and others' lives in danger. He and Paul Watson worked side by side in the whaling industry, working to make whaling illegal. In every country they protested in, commercial whaling is now illegal. He calls for systemic change to how the scientific community discusses climate change. In this way, he reminded us of Edward Abbey. Golden rice is one of Moore's biggest projects, and he is in the process of getting golden rice on the market in third world countries. He does not have many followers as his approach is very radical, but those who do follow him are diehards. Moore calls for more trees to be cut down and more trees to be planted. He calls for nuclear power to be used in place of fossil fuels. He believes that there is no such thing as global warming and that humans have no impact on the fluctuating environment.
I love nature, and people are part of nature, all people and all living things. I believe in one human family, and that requires international communication and trade. Bioregionalism should not be used as an excuse for isolationism. All watersheds are connected. Environmentalism must be beyond nationalism, politics, and ideology. Biocentrism, or life-centered thinking, is not the opposite of anthropocentrism, human-centered thinking. People are part of life. Renewability and sustainability are strongly linked. Trees and wood are both good. A world without forests is as unthinkable as a day without wood. There are at least as many positive trends in the world as there are negative ones. We are no more headed for doomsday than we are for nirvana, unless a large asteroid hits the Earth, in which case we will go to both places simultaneously.